Amy Billing, born January 9th, 1957 in Oyster Bay, New York. Disappeared March 5th, 1974, age 17, in Coconut Grove, Florida. Status: missing for 51 years, 4 months, and 30 days. Amy was born in Oyster Bay, New York on January 9th, 1957. She is the oldest of two children born to Nathaniel Solomon and Susan Billy. Her father owned an art gallery while her mother was an interior designer and art dealer. The family followed the Jewish faith. Susan Billing had suffered 4 miscarriages before giving birth to Amy. She later described her only daughter as a sociable spiritual teenager and a flower child, very much into nature. Her hobbies included playing the flute and guitar in addition to reading and writing poetry. She also trained dolphins at the Miami Seaquarium. Amy was close to her mother, who later reflected, "I would look at her and think, what did I do to deserve such a beautiful thing?" Due to concerns regarding crime levels in New York City, the Billies relocated from New York to Coconut Grove, Florida in May 1969, where Nathaniel opened an art gallery and Susan pursued her passion as an art dealer in interior design. The family resided in a middle-class household and by the early 1970s were active in several community cultural organizations. Both Amy and her younger brother Joshua, born February 14th, 1958, attended local private schools. By 1974, Amy was considered becoming an actress following her anticipated graduation from Adelphi Academy of Coral Gables on March 31st. As she did not own a car, she often hitchhiked in and around her neighborhood, although never for considerable distances. At the time of her disappearance, Amy was 17 years old, was 5 feet 5 inches, and weighed 110 pounds. She had wavy mid-brown waist-length hair, to a distinctive 2-inch appendectomy scar on her abdomen, and possibly a tattoo. On the afternoon of March 5th, 1974, Amy returned home from school, ate a yogurt, and telephoned her father to ask if she could borrow $2 to pay for a scheduled lunch with some friends at nearby Peacock Park. Her father agreed, and Amy changed her blouse and began hitchhiking to her father's art gallery in nearby Commodore Plaza to borrow the money with a view to later meeting her friends for lunch. She was absorbed by construction workers hitchhiking at the corner of Potacana Street and Main Highway in Coconut Grove, close to her family home in the early afternoon. This could prove to be the last identifiable sight of Amy, as she never arrived at her father's art gallery. At the time of her disappearance, Amy was wearing a denim miniskirt and cork platform sandals. By the evening of March 5th, Amy's mother and brother had become concerned when she failed to return home. This concerning began when Amy's friends phoned the residence and asked Susan why her daughter had failed to meet them as promised. It increased the panic when Nathaniel returned home to divulge Amy had failed to appear at his workplace as promised to borrow her lunch money. A call to the local police department only earned a promise of an investigation if Amy had not returned by morning, with Detective Michael Gonzalez informing Amy's mother, "Don't panic, call back if Amy isn't home by morning." By 6 a.m., a frantic Susan Billy had again reported her daughter missing to the Miami Police Department. On this occasion, an investigation was launched. Law enforcement began actively investigating Amy's disappearance immediately upon receipt of Susan's March 6th phone call, with both parents frequently assisted by family and close acquaintances actively participating in an investigation. Routine questions of Amy's friends and searches of locations she was known to have frequented in the immediate hours and days following her disappearance yield no results, and as Amy had few personal possessions on her at the time of her disappearance. Investigators rapidly concluded her disappearance was involuntary. Upon learning that Amy frequently hitchhiked around her neighborhood, investigators also theorized she most likely willingly entered her abductor's vehicle. The sole item of physical evidence pertaining to Amy's disappearance subsequently discovered was her Instagment camera, which was discovered by a hitchhiking college student in the area of grass beside the Wildwood exit on Florida's Turnpike, approximately 250 miles northwest of Miami on March 18th. Processing of the camera film yielded nothing fruitful to the investigation, as the majority of the photographs were overexposed. However, one of the photographs depicted a light colored pickup truck parked in front of the wall of a vine covered building. Another image depicted a white van. Investigators were unable to locate either vehicle or identify the building. In addition to conducting their own private search of Amy, Susan, and Nathaniel Billing, family also printed and distributed hundreds of missing persons posters. Although Miami-Dade County flyers in both English and Spanish were also distributed both door to door in public locations throughout South Florida in the hope of generating leads regarding Amy's disappearance. The family maintained a visual whereby a family member, typically Susan, remained close to the telephone should Amy and her kidnappers initiate contact. Her mother also contacted the Miami Police Department almost daily to inquire as to updates and progress in the investigation, in addition to holding several news conferences in the hope of maintaining public interest in her daughter's disappearance. On March 10th, 5 days after Amy's disappearance, the first newspaper headline regarding Amy's disappearance appeared in local periodicals. This headline revealed that both police and Amy's family suspected she had been kidnapped, possibly by members of a motorcycle gang. The same evening, a benefit concert to raise funds in search for Amy raised $850, and a fund was established at a local bank to assist the search expenses as a $1,000 reward was uh, also offered for information to Amy's whereabouts. This reward generated several public tips, although none of the perpetrated sightings were confirmed. In the weeks following Amy's disappearance, her family received $2,000 in donations, the reward money from friends, neighbors, and colleagues, while music festival organized by her high school raised $1,500 to fund the family's private investigation to her disappearance. An additional $1,000 was collected from former neighbors of the Billings in New York. Both police and Susan Billing received several tips from individuals indicating that Amy had been abducted by members of either the Outlaws Motorcycle Club of the Pagans Motorcycle Club. Those rival motorcycle gangs had both traveled through the Coconut Grove area of Florida en route to an annual bike festival in Daytona on the date of Amy's disappearance, and both gangs are known to have engaged in violence and abuse against females, including abduction, ape, and ex trafficking. The family and investigators alike viewed this theory as the most likely to explain Amy's involuntary disappearance. On March 16th, a telephone tip from a girl who identified herself as Susan Johnson claimed that Amy had been abducted by the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. Shortly thereafter, the family friend telephoned the Billing residence to inform Amy's parents he had heard from a lawyer who had previously performed legal work for the Outlaws of rumors of a teenage girl recently taken from Miami. At Susan's behest, and with the assistance of this lawyer, two members of the motorcycle gang visited the Billing household to hear her plans for her daughter's return. One of these individuals assured Susan that if Amy was in the outlaw Nation, will return her. Days later, These individuals phoned Susan advising her to simply forget the whole thing. By June 1974, Susan had learned from a convenience store manager in Orlando that a young woman had possibly identified as her daughter had entered his store accompanied by two bikers on several occasions to purchase vegetarian soups at a time a motorcycle gang had been in the city several weeks previous. As the fact Amy was a vegetarian had been unreleased to the media, Susan found credibility in this particular sighting that her daughter was alive and been held against her will. 16 days after Amy's disappearance, her family received a phone call claiming that she had been kidnapped and was being held for a $30,000 ransom. Susan borrowed the sum from friends after hearing a voice she believed to be her daughter's in a subsequent call from this individual saying, Mama, Mama, please. A ravenous was arranged between Susan and the caller for her to deliver the money in a black Achi case at the Fontainebleau Hotel on May 22nd, where the caller was arrested after Susan refused to hand over the money until he could prove he had Amy. The perpetrators of this extortion attempted proved to be 16-year-old twin brothers Charles and Lawrence Glasser, who had no involvement in Amy's disappearance. Both brothers were arrested and charged with extortion, to which they pled guilty. Prior to sentencing the youths, Judge William Gladstone stated the brothers had a long way to come back from the serious delinquent and tragic events which they caused. Shortly after the brothers' arrest, Amy's distraught mother addressed the media, saying, Please, no more crank calls like that one. I would have done anything to get Amy back. Begged, borrowed, or stole. Within months of Amy's disappearance, the Billy family began receiving hoax calls from an unknown man who identified himself as Johnson. This individual openly and repeatedly taunted Amy's family, in particular her mother, and graphically illustrated the abuse and torment he claimed to be inflicting upon Amy. This individual also claimed that Amy had been abducted by members of an organized X ring, was being held captive, and that Susan herself was to suffer the same fate. In one phone call, Susan was told that her daughter had 2 weeks left to live. In another, he stated that he had cut off Amy's tongue shortly after Susan was diagnosed with lung cancer in 1992. She informed the caller of her diagnosis in the hope this knowledge could reach his conscience and he could cease the harassment, or if he were indeed Amy's abductor, release her instead. The caller incorporated this knowledge into his threats and taunts. On two occasions, the caller agreed to meet with Susan at a proposed residence, though the perpetrator failed to appear on both occasions. Although the harassment Susan endured from this individual ultimately caused her to suffer sleep deprivation, nausea, and seizures for forbearance in her face of this ongoing harassment to secure her daughter's release led to her continually engage in dialogue with the perpetrator and hope the cause could be traced. The caller would reveal his identity, or that he would reveal the whereabouts of her daughter. However, despite the vast number of calls this individual made to the Billing household, investigators were initially unable to identify the perpetrator because most of the calls were made from payphones, or the caller ended his conversation after a short period of time. Thus, the calls could not be traced. In addition, the hoax calls were sporadic. On several occasions over the course of 21 years, the perpetrator would make between one or seven calls per evening for successive days. In other instances, months would lapse between his calls. Damn. Years. He's been doing this for years. Despite the ongoing harassment from both this individual and their occasional hoax callers, Vinifer refused to change their phone number in the hope either one of the callers would reveal information ultimately secured Amy's release, or when Amy herself would initiate contact with her family. Uh, Okay. Ooh, what? Okay, so the hoax caller was identified. In October 1995, FBI agents successfully identified the individual who had subjected Susan Billy and her family to over 21 years of harassment by tracing a call the individual made from his cellular phone. The caller was 48-year-old Henry Johnson Blair, a married father of two daughters who had worked for United States Customs Service for 24 years. Blair was arrested and formally charged with 3 counts of aggravated stalking. He was released on $75,000 bond to await trial. At trial, Blair formally pleaded not guilty to aggravated stalking. Although he was convicted of 2 counts of stalking on March 6, 1996, he was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. Blair made at trial of having obtained a form of actual pleasure from making the hoax calls, but instead he had not intended to cause distress. He also claimed to be an alcoholic with an obsessive compulsive disorder and thus not responsible for his actions. He insisted he had never met Amy and that he actually knew nothing about her disappearance. Susan herself expressed disbelief in Blair's actions, stating to the press, I just don't understand why he pinpointed me and Amy. There has to be a reason. Susan later settled a $5 million lawsuit against Blair, adding he had never apologized to her for his campaign of harassment. Prior to his death, a high ranking former member of the Pagans named Paul Branch confessed that members of his motorcycle gang were responsible for Amy's abduction and unaliving. This detailed confession was given by Branch to his wife shortly before his death in Charlottesville, Virginia in December 1997. Reportedly, Branch had been chosen to confide the specifics of Amy's abduction and unaliving to his wife when informed his own death was imminent. According to Branch's confession given by his wife to investigators after his death, Amy had been abducted and taken to a party in the Everglades where the Pagans operated a trailer clubhouse. According to Branch's pathologist confession, Amy had assaulted some of the members of the gang, whereupon she was gang aped by approximately 2 dozen gang members. To subdue her as she struggled against her assailants, she was reportedly injected with drugs until she overdosed and died. Amy had died within hours of being taken to the trailer clubhouse, and her body was been hastily disposed in a swamp. Branch himself had been repeatedly questioned by investigators in the months and following years Amy's disappearance and had denied any knowledge of her whereabouts. He had also personally spoken with her parents. His confession named one individual alleged participated in Amy's abuse and unaliving. This individual, incarcerated for unaliving since May 1974, was interviewed but denied any involvement. Emphasized his belief in Branch's Pathless confession that led detective assigned to Amy's case, Jack Culver, stated numerous details Branch had provided in his deathbed confession matched known facts of the case, some of which have never been publicly disclosed. Nevertheless, he added the caveat, we will never find a body. The numerous leads Susan Billy received regarding her daughter's disappearance ultimately led her on an unsuccessful nationwide search for Amy. Her efforts saw her speak with death row prisoners and motorcycle gangs and pursue tangible leads in numerous states such as Washington, Oklahoma, Nevada, and as late as 1992 to travel as far airfield of the United Kingdom in search for her daughter, ultimately to no avail. Despite the ongoing setbacks, Susan refused to abandon hope in locating Amy. She and her husband closed their art gallery, sold many of their possessions, and moved into a smaller home. Both continued to work to finance their search, and both devoted a considerable amount of their free time and search efforts, which, although unsuccessful in their search for Amy, did helped several other girls and women abducted and are abused by motorcycle gangs. For over 2 decades, Susan Billy refused to abandon hope that her daughter was still alive, stating in 1984, every day I think that's tomorrow. I'm going to find her. If she's alive, she knows I'm going to find her. I have made a promise to Amy in my heart. I must find her. Among the theories Susan speculated as to why her daughter had not initiated contact was that Amy had been immediate intimidated by her abductors and was either being held against her will or being brainwashed. In 1998, Amy's mother and brother had accepted that she was almost certainly deceased. On March 8th, Susan invited several friends and acquaintances who had assisted in her quest to locate Amy to a private memorial service for her daughter at their home, although dressed entirely in black. Susan later stated she obtained a tremendous sense of peace from the ceremony, adding she and her guests would now attempt to laugh and be merry because Amy would have wanted us to. One guest, former Herald reporter Eden Bachman, later reflected upon the cathartic effect of the ceremony had upon Amy's mother, Susan, been through more than any other mother I've ever met in all those years of covering missing children and homicides. She looked happier and more relieved than I've seen her look in the last 24 years. With assistance and freelance corresponding, Greg Susan Billing wrote a book detailing the disappearance of her daughter, her ongoing efforts to discover the truth surrounding Amy's disappearance, and her determination to locate her child. The book Without a Trace, The Disappearance of Amy Billings, A Mother's Search for Justice, was released in September 2001. In October 2002, the Amy Billing Meditation Garden was formally dedicated to Amy's life and legacy. Toward the entrance to the garden, a stone marker with a black plaque stands. An inscription upon the plaque reads, Part Amy Billing Meditation Garden for a beautiful Coconut Grove girl who loved this park. This stone marker was designed by Amy's younger brother. The park is located off McFarland Road in Coconut Grove. Amy's Billings' father, Nathaniel Solomon, died of lung cancer in 1993. His final words were of his desire to see his daughter before his death. Susan Billy died of a heart attack on June 7th, 2005, at the age of 80. Following a long battle with lung cancer, her son Joshua had provided his mother with two granddaughters by the time of her death, one of whom closely resembled her missing aunt. She was later interred in Miami's Graceland Cemetery. Following Susan's death, her family requested public donations be made to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. 2 days after her death, Joshua Billy reflected upon the lifelong impact his sister's disappearance had upon his mother. Remarked, I don't think my mother ever found peace. She took that as a really tough wound right to the grave.